clicking over there? AV team? What's the design? You just click over. There is a theologian by the name of Irenaeus, and he once said this. Okay, you're just going to have to click back there. I'm going to say click, and you guys click over, okay? If you would click. He once said, the glory of God is fully human. The glory of God is a human fully alive, excuse me. That's by the theologian Irenaeus. And now, many people think that when Irenaeus said this a long time ago, he must have been reading Genesis chapter 2, because Genesis chapter 2 shows us an amazing picture of how things were truly meant to be. Human beings, fully alive in the relational structure, if you click, that God created for us the way that they are in Genesis chapter 2. Now, here's something we often overlook about creation, as when we know it, but we don't recognize it very often, is that we and our world exists because someone wanted it to exist. That someone being God. That we were created by a creator in a certain way, and the creator wanted us to exist a certain way. And Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 tells us what that certain way is. If you click over, Genesis chapter 2 verse 4 says, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that Yahweh God made earth and heaven. This is the account. You see this phrase 10 times in the book of Genesis, and it breaks Genesis, therefore, into 10 different sections. But scholars agree that more than just breaking the book up into 10 sections, this was the way the author was basically trying to say this. Now that we've talked about this one thing, let's dig deeper into that which we just talked about. So 10 times you're going to see something that the author was talking about, and then 10 times you're going to get a deeper dive into that subject. So here in Genesis chapter 2, what we've been talking about is Genesis chapter 1, which is all about how God created everything, okay? And so basically, in the author saying this is the account, he's saying this is why and how the universe that God created is actually very good. The Hebrew is tov me'od, right? Very good, perfect. And if you remember, creation, when he creates all things before human beings, it's good, just tov. But then with human beings, it's tov me'od, very good. Here's why creation is good, but us human beings are very good. Here's why, although we, as God, has made everything lovingly, only y'all humans were created in our image and in our likeness. So let's deep dive to find out. Now, God doesn't wait very long to tell us why. If you click over, and he says, the heavens and the earth when they created in the day that Yahweh God made earth and heaven. If you see in the red over there, right, you see the shift and the switch, do you? It goes from heaven and earth to earth and then heaven. Now, that's not just some random mistake by the author. That's very purposeful, because throughout Genesis 1 and 2, you see this shift happening. Genesis 1, again, heaven and earth in this order, flipped earth and heaven in Genesis chapter 2. If you click over, Genesis chapter 1 is kind of a top-down drone shot perspective, whereas Genesis 2 is the on-the-ground helmet GoPro. This is a screenshot of a YouTuber online who fishes and does those sorts of things in the Australian Ocean. He was riding a clear kayak. I don't know why that's important, but he ran into these whales. So the picture on this side over here is the whales from the top down, and the right side is what he literally saw. Sorry, it's really small, right? But that's the idea. Genesis 1 is this top-down view of everything. Genesis 2 is the helmet GoPro, what you see literally from eye perspective. Genesis 1, God is creating by speaking, let there be. And then in Genesis 2, he creates with his hands and his breath. In Genesis 1, God is this otherworldly, extraordinary God out in the heavens doing crazy God things that we could never dream about. And in Genesis 2, he's a master farmer, a gardener, and a surgeon. It's as if God is saying, now that I, Yahweh, your God of heaven, have created earth, let's take a close-up personal view of what I see in terms of what I've just created. And what he has made, as we'll find out, is the 4 relationships at the center of creation, and we're going to look at them one by one. Let's start with 1. If you click, the relationship that we have with creation, you can click over. In verse 7, it says, then Yahweh God formed man of dust from the ground. Daniel Lee's back over there. I just call it Daniel Lee, Daniel Kim. He loves puns. This is a pun of God, a play on words. The word for man in Hebrew, if you click over, is Adam, and then the word for ground is Adamah. It's literally just a syllable at the end. So you take the away and you get Adam. Adam was made from Adamah. It's a play on words. It's why oftentimes in the world we'll say we are earthlings, because we're of the earth. So what God is telling us essentially is that human beings can't be fully alive unless we live in harmony with the physical reality that we live in. And the physical reality for us is both not only the earth, but also our physical body. So let's look at those two things one by one. Physical earth. We live in a very weird world where I feel like I can't remember the last time I looked on the news and didn't see news of a crazy natural disaster somewhere in the world. It used to not be this way. Things like crazy natural disasters would only happen once every 5, 6, 7 years, and we'd be devastated by it, but it seems like every week there's something going on. Here's when I knew it was really bad. Okay, I had the opportunity to take my dad to the dentist. His teeth were having problems. That's not the point, but it's a long drive over to the dentist, and as we're driving, we're talking about random things, and then randomly he looks over at me, he gets this concerned look on his face, and he goes, oh, man, we're in trouble. In Korean, 우리 큰일 났어. We're in trouble. And I was like, oh, shoot. That usually means something bad for me, right? So I was, why? What's going on? And he goes, did you hear about the iceberg that's melting too fast? You haven't heard? You should read the news. I was like, huh? Excuse me? I mean, I hadn't heard of it. And then he goes, it's bad. He goes, we're ruining the earth, and there may be no earth left for your grandkids. Now, if this isn't surprising to you, I think we can say stereotypically that Koreans are not the most earth-conscious people. I can't get my dad to recycle, but obviously, suddenly he cares about the iceberg that's melting, right? We are not good with waste management. We're not great with green energy, all that stuff. Because it's cheap, we still use styrofoam cups and plates. It's terrible for the earth. They take 3,000 years to disintegrate. It's bad. We should not do it, but we do because it's cheap. It's kind of like what Koreans are in some ways, it feels like. And we're not all that abstained from this, not being mean, but a while ago we said, hey, let's get rid of all cups and just do mugs for coffee. We put a bunch of mugs over there, but nobody used it. Why? Because you have to wash it afterwards. So we get disposable, recyclable cups that you can dispose, and now coffee is more popular than ever. Just kidding. But the whole idea is that's kind of our relationship with the earth, isn't it? We now, more than ever, I think, need to consider what it means to care for the Adamah from which Adam comes from. That God has made the world to work in a certain way, and the way we're treating it isn't good. And we must indeed care for the earth that God created and put us on as its Lord and keeper. Then there's our relationship with our physical bodies. Christians have long believed, if you click over, that I do not have a body, but that I am a body. We and who we are incorporate our physical bodies. It's why we are embodied people, they say. Now, this sounds silly to you, like what's the difference, Pastor Pete, of having a body and being a body? Well, actually, there's a big difference. Throughout the history of the world, humans have struggled with this idea quite a bit. In the ancient times, often human beings would want to transcend their body. Say, you know what, I hate the limitation that this body gives to me. The older I get, I understand. My knees don't work the way that they used to when I was 20. There are limitations to this physical body that I have. And people would say, I don't want to be limited by this body. I want to be limited by the physical laws of reality. I want to somehow transcend it. And they would do so through different modes of spirituality and so on and so forth. Nowadays, it feels like it's kind of flipped. We seem to think today in our world, my body is just the body. I can do whatever I want with it. It doesn't really affect who I am and my soul. But I think we would agree on both sides of the coin that this is not true. Today, I think we recognize more so than ever that what I do to my body, the physical things that I experience and some of the traumas that I have as a physical body impacts everything of mine, including my mental and my emotional and so on and so forth. Apologies for the topic, but it's often, in my opinion, the most destructive thing and part of the sex industry that is so profitable and popular in our world today. That on both sides of that coin, what is done with our bodies impacts all of us to the core in every single way. A pastor once said, it's not on your screen, a man who visits a brothel cannot park his soul outside of the brothel as if it were a car. What we do matters to everything who we are. 1 Corinthians 6:15-20, it's not on the screen, I'll just read it for you. Paul says this same idea. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take away the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? May it never be. Or do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says, two shall become one flesh. But the one who joins himself to the Lord is one spirit with him. So flee immorality. Every other sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. We were created to live in harmony with both the earth from which we were formed and the bodies which we've been formed into. So what we do and what we do not do in both ways, with the earth and with our bodies, indeed matters. Being fully human and fully alive is to be in shalom, good relationship with both the earth and our bodies. And in a world, I think, that is increasingly becoming digital, where face-to-face and body-to-body interactions are becoming more few and far between, I pray that we as a church would then indeed begin to redeem these relationships both with the earth and with indeed our bodies. So that's relationship number one. Relationship number two, if you click over, is relationship with others. Click over one more time. In verse 18 of chapter 2, it says, "It is not good for the man to be alone." This is fascinating. In a perfect world, before sin enters, right, mind you, God looks at what he had just made, which is tov me'od, and then goes, wait, something is not quite right. And the something that's not right is it is not good for man to be alone. And so the solution he comes up with to this problem is, hey, let's create a helper suitable for this man I just made. And the helper suitable is a woman made from a man, and then the marriage between the man and the woman. Now, the solution that God comes up with is very interesting to me, because if you remember from what we just read, Adam had just finished naming every physical creature on the face of the planet, and only God knows how long that must have taken. And if you've ever had the privilege of naming someone, or even a dog, or whatever, you know that that is a big thing. It takes a lot out of you. There's the pressure of this person, or this animal, or whatever, is going to have this name forever, maybe. That's a lot of pressure. And then there's a lot that you get tied into it, right? I had part in naming my 3 children. It takes a lot out of you. There's a connection emotionally, mentally, the whole bit. So even though Adam had just gotten done naming every physical creature on the planet, still none of them were suitable for him. Now the word suitable means according to what's in front or corresponding to. So suitable is equal and adequate, different but yet equal. And so the suitable helper that God creates is a woman who is very much like the man and yet different, a suitable helper. Now, if you click over, the word for a helper is this Hebrew word ezer. And interestingly, other than here, the only time that this word is ever used is of God. Only God is ever an ezer. God is the great ezer, the great help. And this is significant because what it means is that though many things in the world is helpful to us, there's only one that is suitable enough to be an ezer, and that's God. And this is because more so than an ezer being someone that just helps you, the responsibility and the role of an ezer in the Old Testament is someone who comes to your rescue and helps you when you cannot help yourself, which of course is what God does all the time. So an ezer isn't your intern, isn't a secretary or an assistant. It's not someone who gets you coffee or does whatever you tell him or her to do. An ezer is a powerful figure who comes to help you, right, when you cannot help yourself. So in a perfect world without sin, God decides that Adam, the first man, human being, needs an ezer, needs someone equal and different from him who would then rescue him when he cannot. And so then he creates a woman. That's why one theologian once said, women are placed by God on the human scene as the strong who come to help and save the weak. Glory be to his name. It's no wonder that Jesus never denigrates women and upholds them in so many different ways. It's also why I think woman is made from man's rib, because they are equal and joined together. My professor said, woman is made out of the rib from the side of the man to be equal to him, literally side by side, but also to be from near his heart, to love and be loved by him. All this means is that man is not fully human nor fully alive until Eve hits the scene. The Hebrew word, interestingly, for man is ish, and the woman is isha. That's how well connected they are. A friend of mine once said, oh, it's fitting that a man's name is Ish, because all you ever want to say to him as a woman is Ish. But you understand how that's connected. Now, perhaps more accurate, if we're just digging deep a little bit, is that, and what this means is more so than marriage, is human beings are never fully alive alone. That we were made for the other or another, if you want to look at it that way. And this is important to mention because, just as we said a few weeks ago, this is not an advertisement for marriage. This is not us saying that only married people are fully alive and fully human. No, this cannot be true. Why? Because Jesus, the most fully human and fully alive person to ever walk the earth, never married. But as we spoke about last week, what this is saying is that we were created for the other because we were created from the overflow of God, who is all about the other. In his Trinitarian self, God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who is so yet distinct, three people, but so together and for the other that they're one. We came out of that overflow, so of course it means that we were made to be with the other. We are not meant to do life alone. It's why we're made for unidiversity, as we talked about last week. That our relationships ought to resemble the unidiversity of the Trinity. And therefore we ought, as Christ followers, love one another and be one another's Ezras if we can, to have relational harmony, unity, and peace. That's what it means to be fully alive and fully human. Then the third relationship in our little fourfold is relationship with self. If you click over, verse 25, it says, "And the man and the wife were both naked and were not ashamed." Naked and not ashamed is a phrase that they use in the Hebrew text, right, and in the Middle East, saying basically, I can be myself without a mask. This is a striking sentence in our world, isn't it? Because we live in a world, and this may be shocking to the older folks, but let me educate y'all, pretending like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. But did you know in our world today, we can literally create masks digitally for our folks? I didn't put a picture there because I think the youth kids would have gone crazy and they would have stopped paying attention. But there's a filter on either Instagram or Snap or whatever apps they use. It's called the crying filter. Do you know what this is? Adults? I'm getting a lot of blank looks. Basically what it is when you point your camera onto the face of someone, no matter what they're doing, they could be laughing hysterically, the app and the technology will make them have a crying this face. It's kind of funny but really disturbing all at the same time. But we live in a world where this is a thing, where people can take a picture of ourselves and then edit it right from their phone and then post it and do whatever we want, where we're allowed to, indeed, wear any mask we want, anytime we want, where we have multiple profiles online, multiple avatars, burner accounts, you name it, there is it. And yet here's God saying at the creation of the world that the way we were meant to be is to never, ever have to wear a mask, to never be a false self, that we, as we are made, are indeed perfect as we are, that I can be me and not be ashamed. We were made in such a way that we should be able to look at our mind, body, and soul and say, God, you sure did create a beautiful art in me. Can you imagine looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, Lord, you made beauty? If we're able to say this and understand and believe it, then I think it would mean that we would have zero reason to ever cover up, hide, and or fear and wear a mask. And this is exactly what we see in Genesis. In verse 23, it's when Adam sees Eve for the first time. The ESV translation is not up there. It says, this at last is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. The NIV says, at last, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. The moment Adam lays eyes on Eve, he busts out in a love song. You'll see it in the next slide. If you notice the way that the scripture is made, that little section, that's the song. This at last, bone of my bones. It means that the literal writing has changed. It goes from prose to poetry. So the moment Adam lays eyes on Eve, he busts out in a poem and or a song. There's a great classic R&B song by Edna James where it goes, at last. And she sings this beautiful thing. If Edna James doesn't mean anything to you, go look up the Christina Aguilera version. If that doesn't mean anything to you, then I'm too old for you and you can move on. But look it up. It's a beautiful song. That's what Adam does. At last. Now, this is it, God. This is Adam saying, God, I thought that you could not get any better than all the physical creation that I've just got done naming. But with this one, bro, you done outdone yourself. After seeing all the physical beauty the world had to offer and naming every single physical beauty in the world, yet only when he lays eyes on his Eve does he proclaim a love song. This is how beautifully you and I were made. And this may be a frightening thought to all of us, but they were literally naked and not ashamed. Because they were created by the most beautiful God to reflect his most beautiful image and to resemble his beautiful likeness. Our mind, body, and soul is a work of beauty just as God created us to be. So a human fully alive, if you click, and fully human is the way that we're meant to be, as beautiful as God created us to be. And oftentimes we lose our picture of that. The other day, my daughter, Kara, who's 7, put on this yellow dress, and she put on a new pair of shoes. Super cute she is. And she looks at me and she goes, "Appa, Daddy, how do I look? Am I beautiful?" And I answered this question how I've always answered this understanding of beauty to her ever since she was 3. I said, "Kara, you are always beautiful because God made you beautiful. And that dress with those shoes, super cute, baby. But I hardly notice because the beauty that radiates from within you makes that dress hardly noticeable." That's the way we were made to be. Church, let me tell you, you are fearfully and wonderfully made by the Creator God to image and to be his image and likeness, beautiful as all can be. So then fourth, and maybe most important, our relationship with God. In verse 7, if you click over, and it says, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Imagine this with me. It's a stunning image, okay? What this tells us is that though we had our bodies, Adam had his body, our beautiful bodies that had been formed by God, he did not, and we do not start to live and be human until God breathes life into us. Okay? Now let's dig into this because there's a lot going on here. Okay? Remember, in Genesis 1, God creates everything by speaking, "Let there be," and then poof, it happens. It's crazy. And then in verse 27 of chapter 1, it says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. But interestingly, there is no "let there be" before he creates human beings, okay? So he skips that part. Now, again, we told you in Genesis chapter 2, we're getting the inside, the deep, personal GoPro version, right? And so we're told here, then the Yahweh God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. This word "form" you see in the text is the word that they use of a potter who's making clay pottery. I forgot to put a picture there. I apologize, but if you don't know what this is, you should. It's when there's a little thing and it spins, right? And then there's the clay, and then the potter is like going and it's shaping. Usually they make like bowls or vases or something like cooler that I can't make. I tried it one time. I failed miserably. It was terrible. It was basically just a ball, which is not the idea. But it spins, and then literally your hands get mad dirty because you got the clay and the water and the whole bit. Do you know what I'm talking about? A potter, God used his hands to guide the clay, which we are, to form us into the shape that he wanted. And so, God, to create us, does not let his word speak, but rather he gets his hands dirty to form us. And then once we were formed, if you're like my wife, just pretend he washes his hands because get all that clay stuff off. Then he looks at our bodies, then he looks at us in his face, right? And then he puts the breath of life into us. Now, let's dig even a little bit deeper, get even closer. The detail that he gives us is that he breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. And every scholar seems to agree that this isn't some analogy. This is real physical intimacy. Imagine this. God of creation, his lips touches our nose. How many people's nose have you touched with your lips? I hope not many. Now, here's where things get real. Parents in the room, if you're the blessed ones who've never gone through this, bless you. But many of you who've gone to this, you know where I'm headed. I think you do. When your kids are young, they do lots of wonderful things, but they also do lots of unfortunate things. And one of the things that they cannot do sometimes is blow their nose. And their nose gets real snotty sometimes. And they cannot do anything about it. Is this conjuring up bad memories for parents? I apologize. Hopefully it's good for you. And you try everything. you get tissue and you do your thing, whatever. I've done crazy things. There's a picture of me taking snot and boogers out of my kids' noses with chopsticks. Okay, so I'm not a great parent. But at some point, everything fails. Even that little blue thing that you like pump and like it's supposed to, all of it fails. And all you see is your little one struggling, and literally every single time, at least in this case, it was Mason. He's sitting right here. I apologize, Mason, for embarrassing you. Every time he breathed, a snot bubble would form. And he was struggling, could barely breathe. And then Christina and I looking at each other and we're going, no. Honey, you got to do it. So I take his little face, and then I bring it close to me, and then I take my mouth and put it on his nostril, and I suck as hard as I can to get the snot out. And then I concentrate as hard as possible to make sure that the snot does not go down my throat. And then I can spit it out. If that ain't real love, I don't know what is. Don't go home asking your parents if they ever sucked snot out of your nose. I'm sure they still love you if they haven't. But you get the picture. Everybody's reacting this way because don't nobody ever want to do that. Husbands and wives, let's just be real. You ain't doing that for your spouse. Blow your nose on your own. You're a grown person. I don't need to help you. But a baby, you must. Unless you just want to see him or her struggle. That's not nice. That level of intimacy and love, except not as gross, because he's not sucking the snot out of our nostrils. He's breathing life into it, is the level of care and attention, detail, and intimacy that our God has for you and for me. Striking. And the word isn't the same word, but for me, when I picture this, I think of the word for spirit that's often used in Hebrew scripture. It's called ruah. It's the word that's translated breath or wind, but also Holy Spirit. Though it's not the same word, I'm being clear, it's not the same word here in the Hebrew. I imagine that God takes his ruah, the Spirit of the living God, and breathes into us that wind and breath of life. And that's what makes us human beings fully alive the way we are meant to be. It's why we said we are embodied creatures, as you click over, but more so in-bodied creature, or better, in-breathed people. The life of the very living God in us that makes us live. The way life was meant to be was for us to enjoy this type of intimacy and intentionality with God. That he doesn't just love us, no, he carefully and deliberately and purposely with every being, his hands and his breath, creates in us life. That's what it means to be alive. That's the kind of relationship we're supposed to have with our God. This church, these four relationships, enjoyed to their fullest, is what we know as shalom, if you click over. It's the ever-flourishing of all things, the way things were designed to be, meant to be. My professor taught it to me as a win-win-win. Everyone wins. You win, I win, they win, God wins, we win, the whole world wins. Flourishing shalom, the way it was meant to be, the way God created all things to be. But unfortunately, as we mentioned, if you click over, things, as we experience them, are quite broken, aren't they? Bing, click. Nope, no click. Cool. There you go. Things are so far from the way they were meant to be, aren't they? And I think at times in the church, things can quite seem bleak, disparaging, disappointing, frustrating, anger. But I think this is where we as a church, in and through the way we dream and therefore pray, that we recognize, indeed, things are very broken, but that we as a church can dream of shalom because they are indeed being redeemed. Now here's how things are being then redeemed, and we'll finish here. Do you remember Ezra, if you click over? At the creation, God created for Adam in a perfect and sinless world, and Ezra and Eve to be his companion, but more so, his rescuer when he could not rescue himself. Eve is the suitable helper. Why? Because she is so like Adam, and yet not so, and therefore is the only suitable helper, good enough, on his level, and yet different enough to rescue him, right? That's what it means to be a suitable Ezra. And throughout the Old Testament, as we said, this Ezra is God Yahweh, who is indeed only suitable enough to help us because our sin is so big that no one else can handle. And when we cannot rescue, he's the only one that can. And then one day, in the history of the world, God then revealed that actually there is an ultimate Ezer, and that Ezer is, as you know him, his name is Jesus, if you click. And Jesus is our only suitable helper because he is the only one that can redeem all of our brokenness. You remember if Genesis 1, top-down view, and then Genesis 2 is the GoPro view? Genesis 3, in Jesus' story, it's like a whole different level of in-closeness. Jesus is our Ezer because he takes on our humanity. He becomes literally like us and shows us how we might, as human beings in a broken world, live the way we are meant to live. Suitable. Ezer. But also he is our Ezer because he is God and yet fully human, the only one who could take on God's full wrath for sin and wipe away the penalty for sin, death, once and for all. And in and through all those things, Jesus shows us how we might live redeemed lives, even here and now. Because this is not just a picture of eternity to come. Now here's how Jesus redeems our relationship, and you can click over it, get rid of those black lines. With creation, Jesus redeems that relationship because when he resurrects with his body. When he resurrects, he's got the scars and he's got the things. The disciples, he says, touch him, feel me, I'm still me. It's interesting to me because I think as God and as Jesus, when he resurrected, he could have said, you know what, give me a whole new body because this one sucks. It's marred, it's scarred, it's got all this stuff on it. No, give me a new one. But he does not. He keeps that body. And it shows us that when we resurrect, our bodies indeed do truly matter. That our bodies, though they will be perfected and resurrected, it will still be our own. We matter, our bodies. And even with creation, it tells us that when Jesus returns, he's not going to just vanquish this earth as it burns and we get lifted up and go, bye earth, no need to see you no more. No. He brings down the new heaven and the new earth and redeems all of this, which means the way that we treat the world we live in matters because it matters to him. And then Jesus goes on to redeem relationships with others. Have you known ever a human being who treats others the way that Jesus does? Who is respectful and loving and kind and gentle, cherishing and treasuring of others as Jesus does. And not just the people who matter or are powerful and rich and therefore can help him, but no, all people, even more, the poor and the lonely, the widows and the broken. But also know that Jesus doesn't redeem these relationships just simply being nice and kind. He speaks truth in love, graciously but honestly, pointing people to the truth that indeed we are sinful in need of a rescuer and a savior, but while never exploiting, but rather giving his life up so that we may know God. And then Jesus goes on to redeem our relationships with ourselves. See, Jesus indeed is the most beautiful living being we've ever seen, so radiant in all of his beauty that comes from within. But interestingly, the world did not so think. Isaiah 53 tells us that he was actually perhaps ugly, detestable to our eyes. That when people saw him, they were like, that dude, not so good. Not much to look at, we're told. He was never rich nor powerful, discarded by most. And yet he was the most beautiful person because beauty radiates from the design of who we are, not from what we put on outside of it. Jesus was indeed the person who was most naked and not ashamed, a person who's so comfortable in his skin that his radiance attracted people like magnets because he knew he belonged to the Father. And then lastly, Jesus redeems our relationship with God by taking our sin away. But as we finish, this is where things get a bit off script. If you follow the pattern, Jesus has been redeeming these relationships with ourselves, with one another, and with creation by showing us how we should live, right? Here's my example, now follow it. But when it comes to his relationship with God, you would think if the pattern holds, then he would say, hey, here's how I love my God, here's how he loves me, here's how we relate, emulate that, and then be it. But that's not how this works. Because while he did that for so many years, at the end, things took a very shocking turn. Because rather than just showing us how much he loved God, rather than showing us how much God loved him, Jesus says, the way that I know I love my God and the way that you will love your God is when I take on his full wrath that he's been saving, as Romans 3 tells us, from the beginning of the world until now, so he can pour it out on me and destroy me so that you do not have to be destroyed. Jesus' relationship with not only God, but all these others actually in the process are destroyed. He's buried in the earth, no longer relating to creation, buried in a dark and cold tomb. The breath of life in him snuffed out, as we're told on the cross, he breathes his last. He's despised and rejected by all, hailed as Hosanna 1 minute, and a couple days later crucify him as if he's worse than a criminal. And the oneness and the unity that he has with God broken as the Father turns his face away. Banished to hell for 3 days. And all of this to redeem the brokenness with which we live, so that they may actually be redeemed little by little here on earth, but fully forever, the way they're meant to be when he returns. This is the dream of Shalom. Jesus shows us the way. Not perfect, we won't be, but indeed, in following him, we can. But more so because we love God and know that he loves us. Church, this dream that we dream of Shalom, and you can click on the last slide, it will never be perfect. It will never be exactly as it's meant to be until things are fully restored. But I believe we shall dream and realize that God has made a way for this to be redeemed. So perhaps what we should say is we are not satisfied with the way the world is, but we would dream and pray, therefore, that God would redeem it. And perhaps it is us, the church, the people of God, amongst us, where this redemption will indeed begin and then spread to the ends of the earth. I understand that in many ways this sounds insane or crazy, too big and too bold. But I pray that we as a church would never relinquish the dream that God tells us is possible. The one that we see in Jesus, in his life, and the one that we hope to have lived out of us as he indeed is in us. So church, may I invite you then to pray. Parents, will I invite you to pray for this, not only for yourselves, your marriage, the relationship with your children, how we deal with the earth. All the church folks in here, may I invite you to dream and pray that this is indeed how we will live. That the world will know that we are God's people because these relationships are being redeemed as they were meant to be. And when they are not, will you fight and pray and ask God that he would indeed redeem these things? Graciously understanding it's not going to change overnight, but little by little indeed he will redeem us and has redeemed us until one day all things are made new. May you dare to dream. And as you dream, then may God fill your vision, but more so fill your heart. And literally fill you with indeed the breath of life, the Ruha, the Spirit of God who works in you, and that we would then be able to live this life. Now, hopefully better by better every day, and then once and for all when God returns. So church, I invite you to pray. Will you pray that the brokenness of these relationships that we live in, that God would redeem them? Would you pray that indeed he would do this work